From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And ahead today from Iowa State University, Lee Schulz on the cattle markets. He'll talk about being flexible when making marketing decisions on those weaned calves this fall. Then K-State's John Holman on the just-released K-State Forage, Hay, and Silage Variety Trial Report, which evaluated over 200 hay and silage lines for their productivity and their feed quality. Also, K-State's Jaymelynn Farney, and from the University of Kentucky, Jeffrey Lehmkuhler will talk about the option of grazing standing corn. And on this week's 4-H segment, K-State's Beth Hinshaw previews the upcoming State 4-H Horticulture Judging Contest. All that right here on Agriculture Today.
A social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #alone together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Thanks for tuning in once again for Agriculture Today. As always, it's good to have you aboard. For this week's cattle market segment, we turn now to a livestock economist out of Iowa State University, Lee Schulz. And in a few moments, we'll talk about preparing for the fall calf market and things that you producers might want to contemplate as far as your marketing plans for those calves. But let's look back, Lee, if we might, at last week's fed cattle prices. Up again. They seem to be steadily climbing that ladder rung by rung, week by week.
Certainly, that's what we've seen this last week. We're about $1 higher than the previous week. When you look at the Southern Plains, was trading in that $97 per live weight range. Nebraska was closer to $1. Dress sales were about $160. And even the Western Corn Belt, we've seen some sales at $102. So we continue to climb out of the summer low, it appears, so far as we set that. Here over the week, we were on the futures board about $1 to $2 higher. And so I think really that futures action has been supported by the cash trade. Notably, too, the feeder cattle market has shown some considerable strength. That's paired up very much with the cash trade. I think when you look across feeder steers and heifers, they're about $4 higher than the previous week. We're seeing really strong demand at auctions, and that's likely to continue as we've seen weather conditions improve, and some of the very dry areas have gotten some timely rains, and that's kept the corn market in check as well as provided that needed forage.
Back on the Fed side, slaughter weights, the latest numbers that are out there, do they reflect a clearing of the backlog of cattle that was caused by the packer shutdown of some weeks back now?
Well, when you look at it in aggregate, I certainly think it's showing that the improvement that we're seeing. Now, there's certainly a backlog of cattle out there. Some of that has been mitigated by the fewer placements that we've seen, but eventually we know those cattle need to come into those feedlots. We look across all live weights, they were about 30 pounds heavier than the previous year. That's not as bad as many of us, I think, have anticipated. But there's certainly some cases out there where I think we're seeing some rather large weights. And those are the cattle that really will need to be targeted here over the next several weeks to really help ease that backlog situation. But, we continue to make improvement as we've seen. Slaughter levels are about at par with year-ago levels. We've seen that persisted really through June and July. So that's really helped with that backlog that had developed earlier in the year.
Well, on the demand side of the ledger, Lee, what's the latest on the boxed beef trade? And moreover, how that's likely to shape up as we head toward the next point of demand, if you will, and that would be the Labor Day weekend.
Well, I think that's really the key, that we've really brought the boxed beef prices down. But there is some optimism that will continue we could see some appreciation in there, really driven by the relatively low prices. So could that spur some demand as we get into the Labor Day holiday? We have several weeks to get there yet, so I think this could be a slow, drawn-out process. But really the hope there is that will help see some appreciation. I think really the wild card is understanding of how food service does see some resumption and how that impacts beef demand. It's likely not to look anything like it did normally for some time, but hopefully we see more and more resumption there, and that does help beef demand.
And on the export front, well, something that's happening that's affecting all of our trade potential, it would seem, agriculturally speaking, the falling value of the dollar, and that would have to serve as a catalyst for exports, or at least contribute to a friendly outlook there, would it not?
It does, and so when you look at the value of the dollar, that certainly gives more purchasing power when you see declines in that to our key importing countries. Now, through really the first 7 months here, we're seeing beef export volume about at par with year-ago levels. That's not really the whole story. Japan is up about 7%. South Korea's at par. But Mexico has really been the one that we've seen a dramatic decline, so about 30% below year-ago levels. And really you have to point to the value of the dollar relative to the value of the Mexican peso. So even though we've seen declines in that U.S. dollar, the index there, even greater declines relative to the peso. And so, that has impacted export flow there. But hopefully, we continue to see some improvements. The lower prices for U.S. beef exports hopefully will help that relative, given that dollar situation. But, that's a big part of the export picture here, that really what was very helpful earlier in the year when we did see strong exports, it kept cattle values higher than what they could have been, and which were much lower values.
All right, then, to our focal topic of our session today, and that is those calves to be marketed in the fall, generally speaking, the spring-born calves, weaned calves, what one might want to think about as they plan out their marketing. You say there are enough wild cards out there that producers need to be somewhat flexible. You might expand on that, Lee.
And I always suggest this going into this period, really try not to get stuck in that all or nothing marketing strategy. So maintain some flexibility. This year, probably it highlights that even more as we've seen significant volatility in the markets. But now we've seen some higher prices here, and which July really provided for us. We've seen deferred feeder cattle futures see some appreciation. Really, they're trading at the upper end of contract highs. So really, that's providing, I think, some optimism, and maintaining flexibility may even give some more optimism there. So walking some of that corn off the farm, given we have low feed prices, targeting some markets that may see some higher prices just from a timing standpoint. All those need to be taken into consideration. Now, facility space, weaning dates, feed costs, all those resources still matter in this equation. But I think having from the onset the thinking of let's maintain some flexibility could be helpful to producers this year.
As part of that flexibility, what would you recommend producers use to help guide them on whether or not to pull the trigger on selling calves, and if so, when to pull the trigger?
One of my favorite tools to use is beefbasis.com. That tool allows producers to make forecasts, to make value of gain projections. And honestly, I probably run those projections almost daily as we get into this fall marketing period, because it really provides a guide of what that value of gain is. Now, it doesn't talk about cost of gain, but each individual operation, I think, has a pretty good handle on their cost of gain, given the resources they have. Really, the key question a lot of times is that value of gain. So using beefbasis.com, you can really easily project. There's several markets here in Iowa. There's several markets for each individual state out there of key calf marketing states that allow you to run those value of gain projections. And when I run those just here today, it shows that they're pretty good relative to cost of gain projections. And so I think that suggests that, yes, there's value of adding weight to calves this fall. You need to really keep an eye on those markets because we know conditions can change. But this year, adding value may come in the form of adding weight as well.
And one further thing on this briefly, Lee, and that is the preconditioning factor and the value of putting those calves through a preconditioning program, something that producers need to contemplate as well.
Certainly, and that does increase costs because that preconditioning, you have those calves on feed longer. There's some health and management practices with those. But we've seen over history that offers a premium. And here in Iowa, we have a very strong preconditioning program, a green tag, gold tag program. And when I look at last year's sales, and I really want to highlight last year's sales was a calf market that was a pretty pressured calf market that we did see. And even then, we seen preconditioning premiums for steers in the range of, about $5 to $11 per hundredweight more than their counterparts that were not preconditioned. So when you take those value gain projections that are looking rather favorable and you add on to that those preconditioning premiums, that looks like, calf prices could be at par with year-ago levels or even stronger than we've seen last year.
By all means, producers, take advantage of the beef basis tool for working up all the numbers on your calf marketing decisions. Beefbasis.com is where you'll find that. Lee, thanks for the comments right here as always, and we'll catch up with you again in a few weeks.
Thank you.
That input on the cattle markets and associated decisions from Lee Schulz, livestock economist at Iowa State University, with us on this opening part of Agriculture Today. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today, 800-321-3276, or visit us online, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions. Agriculture Today continues now, and to let you livestock producers know that there's a new resource at your disposal for knowing more about summer annual forages and their productivity. K-State has just posted its latest edition of the Summer Annual Forage, Hay, and Silage Variety Trials from 3 sites around Kansas. One of those involved in pulling all of this data together, forage agronomist for K-State, based in southwest Kansas, John Holman. John, right out, these are from your 2019 trials, but it takes a while to compress all of this into a report that producers can use, and that's the version that was just released, correct?
That is correct, Eric. Yes, we've got the 2020 test currently in the field that we're taking in-field measurements right now, measuring things such as height and flowering date currently. But yes, the report that just came available was from the 2019 production year. We make the data available quicker than that on an online version, but it takes a little while to get all of the data compiled, analyzed. We also measure forage quality, and so it takes a while to get the nutrient results back and analyzed and all put together in a nice, clean, comprehensive report.
And it is just that, clean, comprehensive, highly informative for producers. K-State has been at this for several years in a row now.
Yeah, we're happy to be providing this service to the region. We've been doing this for about 5 years now. There's been a lot of interest from the industry and producers, not only from within Kansas, but the surrounding states also are very interested in the type of results we produce from this report.
And this past year, 2019, you covered quite a spectrum of varieties, 95 hay varieties, 99 sorghum silage varieties, and 12 corn silage varieties. So this is a healthy set of numbers here. The locations of the test sites, John, you might go ahead and pass those along.
Yeah, we've been testing across 3 locations in the state at Belleville, Hayes, and Garden City. Belleville and Hayes are managed as a dryland site, and at Garden City it is managed under full irrigation.
John, what we might do, because we're obviously not going to tick through each of the entries and how they did, give folks an idea of the bevy of information that's available through this report. For one thing, you look at plant characteristics, and that can get into maturity dates and sensitivity to photoperiods, things of that ilk, you say.
Right, Eric, yes. When we start looking at annual forages, there's a lot of variability in the type of traits available, and that's very important for producers because there's certain things like you mentioned, maturity date, whether we're possibly growing that crop full season or we're growing that double cropped after a wheat crop, then those individual varieties will have a unique place in the production system. We look at the varieties for hay production for those that are maybe growing it as hay, but also we look at it from a silage production standpoint. And we're not limited to just sorghum. So we have sorghum, sorghum Sudan, true Sudan, millets, corn are all in this test. So we look at quite a number of different species as well as the different traits that each one possesses. Some of the traits that people are maybe more familiar with would be something like brown midrib or BMR. And so those BMR varieties as a class tend to be a little bit higher in forage quality. But there are some non-BMRs that also have very high forage quality. And so that's why we do a very comprehensive analysis of all the different forage quality. And something that's also very unique about the test at Kansas State University is we harvest all of these varieties at the same maturity. And so what's very critical and important about that is as a plant matures, the quality of it decreases. The crude protein content goes down and the fiber content increases. And so we harvest all of these varieties at a similar maturity, and that allows us to do a very nice job of comparing the forage quality of one variety to a different variety. Now, that does mean that it takes quite a bit of work in the field because we are looking at these plots every few days and harvesting them over the period of the growing season and not harvesting them all the same day.
What you're saying there is, John, you're wanting to compare apples to apples in that respect, then?
Yes, sir. Comparing apples to apples, and that way we can really compare one variety to another variety. And it's also important to not look at 1 year's test and make variety selection decisions based on only 1 year's data. It's important to kind of look at how a variety might perform across years or across sites. And so that's also important to see how those varieties will compare. And then the other thing we do in the areas that we have sufficient regrowth is after we cut that in the hay test, we come back at the end of the season and take a second cutting when we reach a killing frost to be able to measure the regrowth potential of those varieties. And so we can see some varieties have a lot more regrowth potential than other varieties. Now, the silage test, of course, it's harvested when that variety is started to make grain, and we don't have regrowth in that. So that's just a one-time cutting.
One presumes that you look at the agronomics, yield, of course, but such things as planting date as part of these trials?
These are all planted at the same date so that things are treated uniformly. But we do have other research where we are looking at planting date, planting rate, fertility rates, harvesting, what happens if you do harvest at different maturity of the plant. And we've been looking at that of both the sorghum and sorghum Sudan, non-BMR and BMR. So in addition to all this variety testing work we do a whole host of other agronomic research on many different aspects.
And as you said earlier, part of this is taking these forages to their end use, and that is their nutritive value. And you account for that fairly extensively in this report, don't you?
We do, Eric. Most all producers are familiar with, crude protein ADF, NDF, which is the acid detergent fiber, neutral detergent fiber, RFV, or relative feed value, but we also measure things that they may be a little less common to see on a report, and that's things such as lignin content or ash content. We account for those things because varieties such as the brown midribs will have lower lignin content, and we want to actually measure how much lignin content is in each of these different varieties. In the silage test, we measure energy content because that's going kind of a different end use. That's probably going into maybe maybe going to a cow-calf, but probably more likely going to a feedlot type ration. So we want to know what the energy content is, and then we measure milk value per ton. So that in case that variety might be going to a dairy, that's a number that the dairy producer would want to utilize.
So the standards such as TDNs, total digestible nutrients, or RFVs, relative feed values, all of that is listed in the tests for each of the entries.
It certainly is. I think we have around 15 different parameters that we actually report for each variety.
So an outstanding resource for you producers who use summer annual forages either as hay or as silage, and the latest data out from K-State, how one can obtain a copy of the annual report in its final form. Where might a producer seek that out, John?
Well, they can contact me directly, and I'd be happy to provide them that information. The preliminary data that comes out, that always comes out earlier, and it's available on the agronomy website under the crop testing page. They can click forages and find that. The earlier data that comes out is there, but for that full comprehensive report, they can contact me directly. I'd be happy to provide them that.
You can drop John an email, jholman@ksu.edu. His full contact information is found at the K-State Southwest Research and Extension Center webpage, southwest.ksu.edu. But in closing here, John, this is just an excellent resource for producers that they may not have been aware of. So you'd encourage producers to use this in their choices for next year's summer annual forage production.
Yes, I certainly would. Yes, this provides a lot of information, and depending on their end use and goal, certain varieties have a little better fit than others, and I'd be happy to visit with them about that as well. But yeah, this is an excellent resource, and we provide this every year, and so as new varieties become available, that information will be in there.
All right. Looking forward to having producers take full advantage of it. John, good work to you, to Augustino Boer, Jane Linkenfelser, and others in the Department of Agronomy for pulling it together. Thanks for taking a look at it with us right here today.
Thank you, Eric.
John Holman is a forage agronomist for K-State operating in southwest Kansas. The 2019 Kansas Summer Annual Forage, Hay, and Silage Variety Trial Final Report is available now. You can contact John directly about that, or you can search for it online. And you're listening to Agriculture Today. After these moments away, we'll be back with more for you cattle producers. Stay with us here on the K-State Radio Network.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Well, K-State Beef Systems Specialist Jaymelynn Farney tells us that there have been a ton of inquiries from producers of late about putting cattle on corn stands that have been hindered by adverse weather, won't go to grain, but may have some grazing value. On her very latest podcast, Jaymelynn brought in a beef cattle specialist from the University of Kentucky who has considerable research experience with grazing standing corn. Jeffrey Lehmkuhler, his name, and they kicked around some thoughts on putting yearling steers on corn in this fashion.
When we were looking at the the grass-fed situation where we were turning steers in there, let's say at that V8 stage, our gains were about 1.7, right around 1.8. So 1.75 pounds on average. Very comparable to grazing sorghum Sudan. And so we actually had another group of steers on sorghum Sudan at the same time, and actually spot on the same gains. They were stocked the same rate, so we really the project didn't account for pounds per acre or anything like that. So it was about the same as the sorghum Sudan. The only downside on the grazing the corn is it is really a one and done type of a deal, where the sorghum Sudan, you're going to get the opportunity for regrowth if you get precipitation. For corn, as soon as that growth point gets up high enough, the cattle kind of nip it off. You really don't get much regrowth on it. But if you're looking at, just rapid tonnage, it really does produce a lot of tonnage in a short period of time. We actually measured almost a ton of dry matter production per acre during the really hot time of the year when it's at its max peak growth potential.
Yeah, that's very impressive. It, competes pretty good with our sorghum Sudans we have here in Kansas for tonnage. So is there any specific method of grazing that you prefer, and why is it that you like to graze corn in that fashion? So
for us, it's going to probably come down to strip grazing. You really do need to use some type of temporary electric fence system. I prefer to go in there with some type of ATV or UTV with a roller if you can. The UTVs are probably big enough today that they'll knock down a big enough swath. Back when we were doing this, we just had the old four-wheelers, if you will, and we would use a roller. The roller would allow us to knock down a big enough area to put the electric fence up so that when the cattle came out of the corn, they had about an 8-foot area that they saw the electric fence. If you don't do that, the cattle are going to come right out of the corn and not see the electric fence, and they're going to run right through it. And to be honest, too, what corn you do roll down, they're going to pick up and eat the leaves off and if you're doing it later in the fall and you're looking at mature corn, they're going to pick the ears out of that corn that's been laid down. So that's not really causing any increased loss and really reducing your utilization. So it takes a good electric fence. It takes a big enough path that if you do get a windstorm, that corn doesn't get blown down onto that electric fence. And that's why I said about an 8-foot swath. Some of our guys will just go in with a brush hog, or I've seen guys go in with a disc bine and just mow that down, or a disc mower, and just mow that down and let it lay down. And the cattle will come in and eat what they want off of it to make sure they've got enough area that you don't short that fence out. Because once they get through that electric fence, good luck trying to get them back out, because it's almost impossible.
Oh, yes. And when you're doing your strip grazing, do you kind of like to do an ultra high frequency, keep them on one area for a day, or moderate stocking rate, or maybe just expound in a little more detailed?
Preferably the ultra high is better. And, for our kind of meet me halfway is not more than 3 days. I prefer to allocate no more than 3 days worth of corn if we can keep from it. I do know of a gentleman that we have that in the situation where he's grazing mature corn starting in around Thanksgiving. He gives them a week's allocation, and I think that's a little too much. And I've seen some laminitis issues in his cows. So if you back that up to 1 day, 2 day, or say 3 day allocation, you're encouraging the cattle to balance out what they're consuming, because they quickly learn how to strip ears if you're in mature corn. And so you asked about rates of gains. When we went in and we balanced the protein intake for those growing steers, we were close to 3 pound a day gains on mature corn that had full ears. But if you didn't balance the protein out, you were about 1.75 pounds to 2. So you do need to make sure that you're providing the protein for those cattle to gain. And so with me, and your question was preferred method. it's strip grazing. It really needs to be controlled strip grazing.
So when you're trying to do your calculations for your planning, what is your typical grazing days or the total amount of grazing days you think you can utilize on corn?
So that's a really good question, and I want to make sure that I try to answer this the way you were asking it. But generally speaking, if we allocate, we actually go through and we calculate the pounds of dry matter needed and what we think utilization will be. And so if I think that it's relatively mature corn, we can go out and assess what the potential grain yield is going to be. And if you have your grain yield, you can then go back and get a rough idea on your residue that's going to be standing there. Now, with the residue, to be what I've seen, to be honest, is anything from the ear down is not going to be utilized. So where you have that ear set, that stalk is too mature and lignified that the cattle really won't prefer to use it. And so what we try to have folks do is set a round bale out as well. And since you're strip grazing and coming back to water, set that round bale of hay there. And you can use the hay intake as a gauge to when you need to give them more as well. And if you see them hitting the hay pretty hard, you know, all right, they're not going to clean up any more of that bottom stalk. It's time to allocate a little more corn for them to go hit. You think your utilization is relatively poor, but understand they're going to eat the ears, they're going to eat the husk, they're going to eat the leaves, just like if it was crop residue in the field. And their tendency is going to leave the larger diameter stalk behind.
From the University of Kentucky, that's Jeffrey Lehmkuhler talking with K-State's Jaymelynn Farney about grazing standing corn. That's just a small part of their extended conversation on that topic. Producers, if this is a prospect that interests you, take in the full podcast. You can get to it by simply searching for Dr. J's Beef online. Dr. J's Beef. And this is Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. This year's State 4-H Horticulture Judging Contest, sponsored by Kansas State University's Department of Horticulture, Forestry, and Natural Resources, 4-H Youth Development, and local extension staff, will be held later this month. Instead of hosting the event on the KSU campus, Southeast Area Kansas 4-H Youth Development Specialist Beth Hinshaw says the contest will be conducted virtually.
So we're sticking with a sort of similar time frame. We would have been on Saturday, August the 15th, and we're still going to do that. But with the virtual contest, kids would be able to take part in that anytime between 8 a.m. on Saturday, August the 15th, through 8 a.m. Sunday the 16th.
And this is important to continue with this contest because there are so many other things that come out of the judging aspect of this.
Yes, I just love the horticulture contest for the kinds of skills that it teaches young people. First of all, we have a quality judging piece. That's where they look at 4 different things. So maybe it's 4 different plates of potatoes, or maybe it's 4 different pots of mums. And then they're going to rank those things from what's the best one, what's the next best one, and so on. And so, you know, anybody who's familiar with judging contests in 4-H knows that that's pretty standard. 4 things, and then you look at them with the knowledge that you have about that, and then rank them. But those are just really great opportunities for young people to really kind of hone that decision-making skill, to really weigh things out and really use their power of observation to make those decisions. So that's one part of our contest. Another part of our contest is identification. And so we always have 50 different samples for young people to identify. Those might be the plant part. They might be the fruit or the nut or the seed. It might be leaves. It could be all different kinds of things. Again, that's just a great little knowledge builder where kids are learning what are all these different plants that maybe I'm going to plant someday, and learning some of those horticulture type skills about, when you look at that, kind of how do you break that down to make your best guess on maybe what it is if it's something that you have not seen before. And then the third part of the contest is knowledge. And so we've used all kinds of K-State Research and Extension materials in the past. And right now we're in the rotation of using some of the Kansas Healthy Yards videos. We've asked that the young people watch those videos, and then that's what their exam will be over. So they're learning things in those videos about, how to mow the lawn at the proper height, how to water young trees, how to do community garden with children, how do you deal with poison ivy, safety tips for mowing your yard, attracting backyard birds, or using rain barrels. So those are just a few of the different videos that we're asking the young people to watch as well to learn additional horticulture knowledge.
I guess the question comes into play then, how can this be done virtually? How will this all work?
Well, obviously it's going to have to be on a computer, and that's what we suggest is that young people are going to have an internet connection, and then they need a computer or a tablet. You could probably do it on a phone, but when we're talking about looking at these pictures, you're going to want those a size that you can really see. So that's why we say computer or tablet is best. And, we've already piloted the platform that we're using at our summer series contests in the Southeast region. Travis Carmichael, the agent in Lyon County, put the horticulture contest together for us, and really it worked out quite well. So what will happen is after young people register with their local extension office, they'll tell them what it is that they need to do. And then the young people, after they're registered, will actually get an email with all the different links that they're going to need for those different parts of the contest. And then they'll have that opportunity, as I said, to take part in the contest between Saturday the 15th at 8 a.m. and Sunday the 16th at 8 a.m.
So will they do this by themselves independently, or will there be someone that's kind of, on the screen with them?
They're actually going to do it independently. And that's one thing when young people register for this contest that, we do ask that you state that you're going to do your own work. And we know it's different, but it is our best option this year. And like I said, we had a really good run with it when we piloted it this summer.
They've obviously been working on their own up to this point, so they're really ready to take this test.
Yes, a number of these young people study year-round on horticulture or work out with a coach on horticulture. We also have some great resources on our website, where they can actually look at different plants. And certainly a number of young people probably have a lot of those different plants right in their own garden or in their own yard to study as well. So yes, they should be ready.
Is there an age group on this?
Yes, our contest, and this is our state Forage Horticulture Judging Contest, is for intermediates, and that's young people who are ages 9 through 13, and that was before January 1 of this year. And our seniors are those who are 14 through 18. And again, that's before January 1.
And I'm assuming since this is going to take place on the 15th and 16th, they need to get registered several days before then.
Yes, our deadline is the 12th of August, but my suggestion is that you contact your local office as soon as you can, just so that you can do all the things that you need to do so that you're ready for the contest.
This is a learning experience, and I would imagine that the youth want to find out how much they really know and how much maybe more they need to learn.
It's nice to have those little touch points along the way where we see, oh, yeah, I really have learned quite a few new things this year. Or, oh, I do have some more things that I need to work on for the future. As I said, there's 50 things on the identification part of the contest, and, those 50 are never the same. So, you may have known last year's 50, but this year's 50 may be very different.
You guys are so tricky.
Well, there's always lots to learn, right?
There is, and I'm sure they're looking forward to it, and hopefully it will go very well and you'll get lots of participation.
We sure hope so, and we're thrilled to be able to offer something. Since we can't come together in person, I just feel really great that we have an alternative for young people to take part in. So continuing to give opportunities to young people.
That's Southeast Area Kansas 4-H Youth Development Specialist Beth Hinshaw. Again, the registration deadline for this year's State 4-H Horticulture Judging Contest is August 12th. Learn more by visiting kansas4h.org or by contacting your local extension office. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.